Ty, you can do whatever lights make sense. Okay, thank you. That's the nicest intro I've ever had. Appreciate it, Jason. All right, so after 21 years of studying running mechanics, I've learned that about 90% of what's needed is right there. That's a lot of time to spend working on something to figure that much out. But there is a third rule to add for specific to the track. That's when in doubt, turn left. I've seen some mistakes on that before, so that's pretty much it. I could end the presentation there, but there is that 10% more to think about. So let's look at what goes into performance. I'm going to focus on the mechanics of running and then a little bit on footwear to finish up. So here's what we know to help with that last 10% of it. This video here shows the US Championships 10K. I'm not sure how to start it. And this is my first attempt with Google Slides, and the play button's not on this screen. So notice the differences in running technique between people. I chose the instant of Footstrike to measure the two joint angles, or knee angles. And as they come down below, you'll notice not everyone is moving exactly the same way. And different hip angles you can see. I didn't show those measured, but the spacing between the knees when the foot hits the ground, the positions of the feet when they touch the ground, that's not all consistent between people. And if you watch the others running by, you'd probably pick out some other characteristics of technique that are just different. Now these are the 24 best 10K runners in the country, at least that wanted to run in these US championships. So why don't they all move the same? This is class discussion time now. I'm not just going to talk to you the whole time. So when we have the top 24 in the country, you'd think they'd know how to do it right, and there'd be one right way. So why isn't there? Why aren't there the same movement patterns between everyone? Yeah.
Well, like you mentioned, their hips are different. Genetics has a huge play into where their bone structure is, so they can have an anterior or posterior hip tilt.
Okay, yeah, so it's a good answer there. We've got different hip structures or just skeletal structure in general. If there's a different shape to the person, then maybe there's not just a fixed way that they should do it compared to someone else. So skeletal structure could be one thing. Why else might one runner not move the same as another? Yeah?
The environment in which they originally started training might indicate how their gait is going to be.
Okay. So if they grew up on the roads compared to the trails or grass running, their body will adapt in different ways, so that could affect it. Yeah. So their history of training, that'd be a good answer. Any other thoughts on that? Have you ever heard the term how someone's wired? That typically means where the tendons or muscles originate and insert. If those are shifted just a little bit, then you're going to have some different lever systems through hip, knee, and ankle, and even the upper body to consider. So different properties in the runner or in the body make it so there'll be different movements that are going to work best. This is an interesting end picture to look at here. This is about lap 8. So there's 25 laps in the 10K on the track, which just sounds insane. I remember as a freshman here, I only had to run 2 laps, sometimes just one, just do a 400. And I would look at Dave Baca, and he'd be out to go do a 10K, and I just thought he was insane. Why would anyone do 25 laps on a lap track? How do you even keep track to know when you're done? But it's become one of my favorite races to watch or to run. I've only done it once on the track, and it took me 20 years till I decided it was time to try it. But Coach Eyestone here, he was great in the marathon, 10K. he calls the 10K on the track 25 laps of contained fury. So whatever that means to you, it makes it so it's now exciting for me to watch because we're just waiting for that move and when the excitement begins. So early on, this was the position. Lopez ended up winning. Notice the angle between his, across the hips there is pretty wide. Mostly, people are trained that a smaller angle there represents someone that's more trained for faster running. But this is the fastest 1500 runner in the entire field. He ended up winning the race also with a great finishing kick. But it was a fast time also, and he has opposite to what's often expected. If we look at Brian, and some of you might know Connor McMillan, Connor ended up finishing 4th that day, his first US championship, BYU recent graduate. They have very small angles there. Sometimes you think, well, maybe it's because of the way they foot strike. Brian is about the most pronounced midfoot striker that was in the entire field, and Connor's a heel striker. Things just don't always seem to match the way people anticipate. So whether it's running or any other field you're interested in, we often look at averages, and there's often outliers, and we want to try to understand them also. So different movements that we see. Now, they move differently because they want to apply forces effectively. If you can apply force effectively, then you can use less energy to run. So this is what it looks like for the 3 directions of force from the ground coming up onto the body. These often don't work. This green line is the vertical force. Notice how large that is. If any of you came to Roger Crown's presentation a few years ago in this same type of seminar, he told us that around 60% of the energy in running goes into producing vertical force. Notice how large it is. At 4-minute pace, we're looking at between 3 and 4 times body weight, all supported on one leg, and that's many repetitions over and over. So there's a huge amount of energy cost in getting these vertical forces created. The red shows some slowing down, followed by some speeding up. And then this is medial lateral. There's always a bit of side to side as the feet roll in, supination and pronation going on. So we want to find ways that we can apply those forces to get the job done, but use positions that make it so that we can not use too much energy as we do that. So is it really that important? Let's look at how important it is to apply forces in the right way. This is steeplechase. Have any of you run a steeplechase before? We've got 2 that have. Okay. This might remind you of some bad memories. But this is the Olympic trials for 2016. And look at Nicole Bush here. Follow her right leg. If you've been wearing spikes on a track before, have you ever done this move? You're walking along in between an interval, and then all of a sudden your spike grabs and you maybe don't fall down. How many have honestly done that stumble? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. That happened to Nicole on this lap. So let's see how it turns out. It's only 30 centimeters deep. Or not 30 centimeters, 30 inches deep right there. But she got completely submerged. Shalea was a little upset, pushed her back in. She's doing her PhD in biomechanics right now and is a very nice person, but in the moment there, retaliated a bit. 4th place, trying to make the Olympic team here, was closing really fast. Here he comes, and one little touch of the barrier. He ended up 9th. He still finished, but kind of jogged in. This is the last one. This is more entertaining one, I think. I never really figured out what went wrong there, but it was it was the very last barrier. There's 35 obstacles to do in the steeplechase. That was the very last one. It was in the qualifying to finals round, and he did make it to finals, but had a kind of a bad day. He was either too fatigued or hurting still from that move. So if you apply forces effectively, it's nice and smooth, looks good how the work goes. But one little mistake in that force, whether it's steeplechase or just running in general, and you may end up falling down or whatever could happen. So my first work in an actual study on running mechanics was at Oregon State, and we were interested in looking at why people choose the stride length that they do. We'd seen a study that had found if people just let their stride length happen naturally, that's where they use the least energy to run for whatever speed they're going. So we started with reproducing that on level ground. This is the approach. You measure their preferred stride length, or rate is actually how we started it, and measure oxygen uptake, which indicates how much energy they're using to run. So we had that going and found that their preferred stride length, at the speed this person was running, it was a little below 42 milliliters there. And then we used a metronome while keeping the treadmill speed the same. We had them taking more rapid or less rapid strides, which means longer or shorter, and kept measuring their oxygen uptake. And we found those other points. We fit a smooth curve through those points, and the minimum value would represent most economical stride length. And this is what we found on all 17 people we tested. Some of the shapes were a little steeper, or maybe the shorter stride wasn't as bad as the longer, but everyone in the study was nearly perfect at the stride they chose to run at was the one that used the least energy. So for level ground in a rested state, we knew that naturally, or just letting your body optimize your stride length is how we use the least energy. Not everyone uses the same stride length, but that's because of the things we were talking about near the beginning. For the rest of our project, we looked at a fatigued state. So here's all 17 of our runners that we used. And notice the preferred is the circle. The most economical was the square. We had them run for an hour at 80% of their VO2 max. That is hard to finish. Running for an hour for some people is maybe not even possible to finish until they train and get ready for it. But 80% of VO2 max is a very fatiguing 1-hour run. So we got them really tired, and then we did the same. We finished the run with the same test. So the blue boxes and circles represent the most economical stride length when they were fatigued, and the preferred stride length when they fatigued. And notice it's still matching up, but it's often different than at the beginning of the run. So fatigue puts the body into a different state. The muscles are damaged, however you want to define fatigue. And for most people that did change, it meant a longer stride at a lower rate. So however the muscles wanted to store and release energy had changed to make it most economical. But even though they were taking longer strides, it seemed to be for a good reason. So you'll often hear someone's overstriding. That's probably not the case, actually. They might look different than when they were not tired, but they're taking longer strides for a good reason. And if they start thinking about it and changing it, then they end up using more energy. So we leave the stride alone for that. We've also looked at uphill running. Any of you happen to know which hill this is?
Yeah, I just did that.
Anyone recognize it? Anyone from California that did cross country? Poop Out Hill. You know it. Okay, this is Mount SAC, Mount San Antonio College. They have the Foot Locker race. There's 4 regions in the country, top 10 in the region, go to a big national meet in San Diego, and they treat them really well, give them a bunch of gear. So this is Poop Out Hill is one of the terms they've given to it. I've heard other ones that aren't worth repeating in here. Anyway, we did uphill running. We brought in the women's cross country team and had them running level and uphill on different days and checked their ability to optimize stride length and found the same result for uphill running. It's a shorter stride because they're going slower, the ground comes to them sooner, but it's still one that the runner optimizes naturally. We tested experienced runners. This was a separate study, some different ones, but still our women's cross-country team. And we compared them to inexperienced runners to see, is there something in the learning and practice of running that gets you better at optimizing? And we found people that were able to run but just had never done it. We got a lot of swimmers and cyclists that didn't want to run, but they were healthy and fit. So we looked at them. They'd never run more than 5 miles in a week in their lives. And they were just as good as the women's cross-country team at choosing the best stride length for them. So it seems to be built into the body. They used a lot more energy to run, but for their body, at least that stride length part of it, they narrowed right in and chose the best. So stride length, we just leave it alone. Now here's something that becomes more valuable, because so far I've just been saying it is just put one foot in front of the other and don't fall down, and that's the end of it. But something we've learned in our lab and in some other labs is the variability around the movements that you do is very important. This shows about 100 runners from our men's cross-country and track teams that have measured over the years on stride length and stride rate. It has error bars listed on there. The error bars tell the variability that is around each data point. And you can see that grows as they go from slow to fast running. So when people are running at race paces, they tend to not move as consistently, step by step. And that turns out to be bad for running economy, using less energy to run. This is 8, 7, 6, 5, and 4-minute mile pace that we're looking at here. And a lot of our runners are going to be going close to 4-minute mile pace in their races. It actually takes, last year, I think there were 4 sub-4 milers that didn't make it to nationals. You have to run 3:58 now to get to nationals in college. So it's still an amazing feat, but not as miraculous as it was back in 1954. So a 4-minute pace, a lot of variability. 5-minute pace, that's a useful pace to run. Jared Ward, that graduated a few years ago, he just became the 13th fastest marathoner the US has ever had at the Boston Marathon. That was 4:55 pace. So Jared, when we test him at 5-minute pace, would you expect his variability is really big? He's done a lot of miles at that pace. So it does grow from slow to fast still, but he does so much training and racing at that pace, he's become better at it. So the take-home message for that part is you want to do a lot of training at the pace that you're going to be racing. Biomechanically, it helps you become more consistent in the movements, and that helps performance. Physiologically, you hopefully would already realize if you're going to try to run a 5-minute mile, you better do some training at that pace so that the physiological adjustments happen also. But there's a good biomechanical reason also. All right, so there's just the idea of stride length and rate. When we've looked at other measurements in running, we find the same kind of outcome. There's a way that we can move that the body mostly just figures out, but anything we can do to become more consistent in the patterns of movement that we do have, that's where we're going to find some improvements in performance. Just a little side note that I don't have time to focus on now. The other part of running mechanics related to wanting to perform well comes down to injury. There are some things we know we can adjust in movement to take stresses off certain parts of the body to help with returning from injury or avoiding injury in the first place. All right, let's talk about Footstrike. This comes up a lot. I get asked questions a lot about should we land heel strike, should we land midfoot. This is the 2017, I think, US Championships 10K. So they're all running about the same pace at the time when I got these images, and you can see a spread, a lot of variety. Some are landing midfoot, some are landing heel strike, some are kind of flat-footed, and it doesn't seem like all the heel strikers are at the top or at the bottom of this, or any real way to classify this in terms of foot strike related to the performance. Here it is for the men's race. You can see a real extreme one there in Diego Estrada, 6th place. He's about the most extreme supinator that we see, especially in the more elite groups. If I ran like that for too long, I'm sure I'd end up injured. He doesn't have a big injury history though. So something about his skeletal structure, the way he's wired, or distribution of flesh under his foot, something with it makes it so that's the natural way for him to run. Now, first they're just pointing out performance doesn't seem to be predicted by the positions people land in. So what do we know about foot strike? The stride length is typically shorter for a midfoot striker, and it'll be a higher rate. So they take shorter steps, but more of them to go a certain speed for some distance. The time on the ground is a little bit less. So when you touch the ground, it depends on the speed a lot. If you're sprinting and you're really good, it'll be around 1/10 of a second. If you're running kind of slowly, it might be around 0.2 seconds, maybe a little bit longer. But that's not a lot of time to take your body from moving downwards to upwards. To think 2/10 of a second is all you've got to accelerate the body a pretty meaningful amount. That's why the vertical forces are so large. But for midfoot strikers, the peak force they get to on that vertical curve is a little bit lower, about 4% lower than the heel strikers. The total number of injuries that people get, whether they're midfoot or heel strikers, is the same. Depends what study you look at. Some say midfoot, some say heel. Most say there's no difference. So I assume there's really no average difference. But the locations of the injuries can vary. So it's common that in the midfoot striker, it'll be something below the knee. For heel striker, knee and above. Now there's going to be exceptions to that. I'm a heel striker and I've got a foot injury right now. So there'll be exceptions, but the tendency is in those ways. So here's a time when you might want to consider changing foot strike. If you've got, say, hip problems that keep coming back and you're a heel striker, perhaps switching to midfoot will take stress off that area in a way that you'll be able to get healed. And over time, you might switch back to being heel striker, but you'll need to be more gradual in the build-ups and adaptations to make sure that problem doesn't come back. So for injury, there may be some reason to modify a foot strike. For performance, which I'm more interested, at least in the projects I do, there's a mix of what you learn. Here's 2 articles from 2014, came out in the same year. One of them in the title saying rear foot striker uses less energy. The other one wasn't so convinced that rear foot is best. Here's a couple conclusions out of their abstracts. This one got confusing to me and I had to read a lot deeper. When adjusting the foot-ground contact biomechanics of a runner with the aim of maximizing running economy. I enjoy the English spelling of that one. There's a few other words in the project that were nice for me to read. A trade-off between a midfoot strike and a long contact time must be pursued. And I thought, what does that even mean? How do you have a trade-off between 2 things that are not the same measurement? But what they said is, it seems a heel strike might be better, but it's not because they're on the ground for too long. So if we can have someone that is a heel striker not on the ground for a long time, then maybe that's going to be best. But their thought processes with the data they had didn't convince me that they really had it fully understood in the best way. But they were kind of leaning towards midfoot's better because heel strike, they're on the ground too long. Same year, different kind of conclusions going on. All right, so for Footstrike, in the end, it seems performance, there's kind of a mix on which one's better. Mostly it seems there's no difference, or if there is, it's very minimal. The risk would be if you try to switch from one to the other when you naturally prefer a different one. There's no guarantee there, and there's a real likely chance that you're going to be worse off in terms of your performance if you switch from what your body naturally likes. All right, so footwear. Here's some racing shoes. This one a while ago had the world record in the marathon. Then this one did. Then last year this one got it. Anyone know the pace for the most recent world record marathon? Even quicker. It was down to 4:38. And he's actually run 4:37 pace for a marathon, but it was in that sub-2 attempt that Nike put on with pacing the whole way, and you have bikes handing you your fluids and get them whenever you want. So there were advantages that made it not count for a world record. He was on pace for 40K. Marathon is 42K. So he faded off the pace in the last 2K and got 2 hours, 26 seconds. That was in this shoe right here, or at least one that looks like it. I'm hoping this will be the next world record marathon shoe, because Jared wears this shoe. This is what he ran Boston in. It's different progression, right? Notice here's what used to be the shoe to wear, lightweight, minimal cushioning so that you're making a shoe that's not so heavy. But it turns out these shoes are lighter than these ones. They've learned that a lot of low-density foam that absorbs and returns energy very effectively is better than just trying to make the shoe as light as possible. So these are the kind of shoes that are seen now. Nike started that trend. Now Hoka and some others. This one is going to be released in December, and it's about the same weight, different type of foam, but low density foam and same kind of idea. Also, there's a carbon fiber plate in it that somewhat changes the lever system of the foot. And that seems to be a benefit. I don't think Aubrey could make it. My grad student Aubrey just finished a study looking at carbon fiber plates of different stiffnesses, and is finding there's something to the carbon fiber plate, but it's not the main reason these shoes are doing so well. It's more to do with the foam. So I often get the question, people come and say, I want to start running, what kind of shoe should I get? And I need to ask follow-up questions to answer that effectively. I need to know, well, what do you want? Why do you want to run? What's your purpose in it? And if their reason is, I want to race a marathon someday, then they're probably going to need more than one pair of shoes. They'll need one just for their general training, and if they want to do it fast, they'll need some kind of racing shoe, which they'll do some of their faster training in, and the rest they might do in maybe the more traditional, like the 280-gram shoe is kind of the typical traditional running shoe. If it's just to be healthy and fit, get some good health benefits from training, then probably one of the upper shoes there that's going to protect the body to help you not get injured as you build, and that's all you'd need, but they're not going to race well in those shoes. If it's to get the feet a little bit stronger, then barefoot running or this minimalist shoe, that could be a good choice because there'll be more stress on the feet, and stress is bad for the body, but healing from that stress is good for the body, and you can develop stronger foot bones, and other tissues within the feet can get stronger by using these. If you want to be racing on the track, then getting one with spikes is probably going to be the best choice. Something that is in the works, coming out soon, is this Vaporfly shoe, they call it. They're starting to make a spike plate that'll fit in this. So you'll see a really big shoe racing on the track now, or at least, actually we already have, because they're prototyping it and some of the elites have been using that already. So depends on the purpose. The Hoka shoe, I looked at that watching people doing Squaw Peak 50 miler and so on, talking to the medical people at a rest